Hey, what's up guys? It's Carl, and today, I, a person with absolutely no military experience, am going to explain why the way that you are running your squad in Airsoft is completely wrong. Just kidding. Kind of. Maybe. No, but in all seriousness, this is an area where old Uncle Carl does feel like he has some relevant input, given that I do see a fair amount of room for improvement in squad level leadership at larger events. And considering I just came from Milsim West's Last Stand Rostov last weekend, where I was a squad leader, I just kind of wanted to strike while the iron is hot and while all of these thoughts are relatively fresh in my head, and just give you sort of my input on it. And just as a disclaimer before the internet neckbeards string me up from the rafters, this is based solely on my 10 years of playing Airsoft, and this is sort of just a compilation of stuff that I have seen in my own personal opinion. So by no means exhaustive, as it never is, so take it for what you will. Okay, so I think for our purposes, we can sort of divvy up the pillars of successful squad leadership into three very broad general categories. And in my opinion, those are going to be intelligence, decisiveness, and communication. Also keep in mind that this is a topic that you could, go absolutely subterranean with the amount of details on, but we're not going to do that in this video. It's going to be relatively short. So for our purposes, I'm talking specifically about larger events, and I just came from a large 3-day field type game. So keep that in mind. This is not necessarily applicable to CQB. Okay, so the first point is intelligence. And what I mean by intelligence here is basically your ability to keep a catalog of everything that you can currently see on the field, be that enemy positions, your own friendly units, what have you, in addition to the mental map that you need to have running in the background when you receive actual intelligence reports of where enemy positions are that you cannot see. You do need to essentially know what the chessboard looks like and where all of the pieces are within it, if that makes any kind of sense, to the best of your ability. Intelligence, for our purposes, is essentially a general awareness of what the field looks like and what you can expect to encounter and where. And if you are keeping mental notes on this correctly, you can sort of maneuver your squad and change your squad formations, maybe shuffle some squad assets around so that you have your machine gunners in positions where they're going to be most effective, your designated marksmen if you've got any in positions where they can take shots if they actually need to. It's all about maximizing squad efficiency based on what you think you are going to encounter at any specific point in the field while you are maneuvering. Simply put, your job as an Airsoft squad leader is not going to be too dissimilar from that of a commander in, let's say, like a real-time strategy game, if you want to think of it like that. And to that effect, keeping an efficient mental map of all of the enemy positions is really going to behoove your squad. But speaking of maps, physical maps are really important as well, and I will tell you why. Now, it's a bit outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about today in this video, but if you are at all interested in these larger events, or you foresee yourself taking on some sort of leadership position, do yourself a favor and learn how to read a tactical map. Knowing the lay of the land is going to give you an advantage when you are determining what the best course, both for maneuvering and attacking, is as you go through an area, especially if you aren't familiar with the field itself. Now, I've played at Hill 559 several different times, so I do have a decent working knowledge of what the field looks like and the different avenues of approach to get to, different specific areas on the field. So I'm not trying to misrepresent myself and make it seem like I'm some squad leading land nav prodigy. I'm not. I just kind of know what the field looks like. But how that ties into the event last weekend, we led a fairly advanced, for Airsoft, dual platoon or company maneuver in which one platoon maneuvered to the south of a NATO patrol base and did a hard anchoring maneuver right there, basically drew NATO into a firefight that they realistically, our forces were not going to win because they're fighting uphill and they were vastly outnumbered. But that distraction allowed for my platoon to maneuver up into the northeast corner of the field using all of the micro-terrain features, essentially to get within striking distance without being seen. Now, by the time that we were seen, it was more or less too late for that defensive position. We were already basically smashing into their rear guard that was really soft. It was mostly like sleeping pits, realistically. Not really good defensively. But because that patrol base was so large, the northern and the southern limits of it weren't talking to each other. So we had essentially used the terrain features to maneuver them into a pincer movement, where we are attacking essentially from both the north and the south north at the same time. And once they realized that it was actually a two-pronged movement and not just that southern flank that they could have probably held pretty, easily, we collapsed them. Now, the reason that we chose that particular maneuver is because a recce team actually snuck out to that northern area where it appeared to be very lightly defended, so we had good field intelligence. And that's sort of the concept that I'm working around here. However, that attack would not have been possible without another factor, and that's going to be the next one that I talk about: decisiveness. Now, this area in particular is one that I probably see airsofters have the most trouble with, and it's maybe the most crucial. All of the BB intelligence in the world is not going to mean a damn thing if you aren't able to quickly think on your feet, analyze situations, exploit openings where you see them, and bring violence and aggression to bear on defenders that really overwhelms them with the amount of force that you're just throwing at them. And I understand that the aggression and the decisiveness when you're in a leadership position or when you're new to a leadership position can be a hard thing to get used to. You're essentially having to take in all of this information in real time and probably make micro adjustments to your squad and, dictating formation and who is going where. But essentially, you just need to commit to a plan as soon as possible. That's not to say that patience isn't a virtue sometimes for this type of thing, but generally, in my experience, kind of waiting to see how a fight unfolds before you commit one way or another generally ends up getting you killed. It's often much better to make any kind of decision rather than none at all. For example, during that company maneuver I was telling you about, we found ourselves in a position where we were on the far right flank. We realized that there was a NATO squad that was maneuvering in on our rear. We then found ourselves in a position where we could turn to face them and risk stalling the entire attack itself, or we could press forward and attempt to kill the defenders in front of us as quickly as possible so that we could outpace the NATO element coming up from behind us. So, presented with those two options, I decided to just commit us to the attack and try and overrun these defenders' positions as aggressively as possible. Now, we died. However, the ground that we took in pressing forward essentially brought us in line with another squad that was off to our left, and once we died, or rather right before we died, we radioed in to let our platoon leader know what was going on. He relayed that to the squad that was off to our left, and even though we died and that NATO element behind us did catch up to us, that squad then came over the hill, and because of communication, we're able to mop up that NATO element and revive everyone in my squad that was up and continue the attack. I hope by this point you are kind of starting to see how the field intelligence of knowing where all of your friendlies are, the decisiveness to keep pushing an attack rather than, maybe stalling and thinking about it for too long, which could get you killed, and the communication and how all these three things sort of form this synergy that just really helps on a cursory level with Airsoft squad leadership. Now, let's talk about communication some more. Communication is absolutely crucial, be it intra-squad, a squad leader talking to a platoon leader, or even just yelling at friendly adjacent units. Obviously, communication is going to be how everything ties in together. Now, if you guys haven't figured it out quite yet from the past couple months of GI videos, I do have a tendency to ramble, and that does bleed into my comms on the field. However, I was lucky enough to have one of my friends who is a former Marine lieutenant in my squad with me, and he was able to give me some pointers to cut down communications to be as simple, concise, and brief as possible, so that there is very little room to misconstrue your intent. To sort of simplify it, I think we probably have all seen or even been the dude frantically shouting, "He's behind the tree," into a radio, but that information is ultimately useless unless there's literally one tree on the entire field, right? A much better way to convey that information would be, something like enemy contact behind the tree at my 12 o'clock, and you'd give a distance, 50 meters, whatever it is. But that takes the ambiguity out of it, so that anyone in your immediate surroundings is going to look at you, orient based off probably where your rifle is pointing. Now they have a direction, they know a distance, and they've got a terrain feature that a contact is behind. And that's just enormously more beneficial than, vague general statements that just don't help anyone. And realistically, those small, concise snippets of information and that brevity can be applied to basically basically every piece of information that you are going to want to convey to another player on the field. Be that where an enemy is, where you would like your squad mates to move to, or reporting your own position into, let's say, a platoon leader. Be as concise as possible. And this is something that if you've got a regular team that you play with, you can go out and just practice at pickup games. You're probably gonna sound a little bit silly if it's like a speedball game or something, but really, like, try and get the hang of it and see what it does for your intra-squad communications, because I guarantee focusing on simplifying it will make you guys flow that much smoother. So using that same sort of thought process, let's just reiterate on the points that I've made. Intelligence is the overall feeling of the battlefield and where both friendly and enemy units are within it. Decisiveness is the ability to take that information and act aggressively with it, and communication is the ability to effectively communicate that information to other adjacent friendly units. All three of those things combined, I think, are sort of just the pillars of what make good airsoft squad leaders and even higher than that, platoon leaders, etc. It's all the same, but focusing on it, I guarantee you will make you a better leader. And again, keep in mind, this is what works for me, and this is just my opinion and how I do things. Realistically, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and probably most folks are going to have their own equally valid ways of going about things. Unless you're the guy that shows up to the game that hasn't studied the layout of the AO at all, can't process information and deliver it quickly to your squad mates, and you ramble worse than I do into your squad's radio, then you're definitely doing it wrong. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for me this week on this issue, but as always, I would love to hear from you. Do you have any SOPs for your team? Like, how do you tackle this thing if you generally find yourself in a leadership position? Do you think I missed anything? Additionally, if you guys have any topics that you would like to see me tackle in future videos, by all means, I'm totally open to suggestion. I'm essentially just kind of going through my own brain and topics that I like to talk about and things that I feel like I can contribute to. But if you got something that you want to see me address specifically, let me know. I'm Carl, this is GITV, and I'll see you guys.